coronavirus curve flatten? The Prime Minister brings forward talks on easing restrictions.
Australians have earned an early mark through the work that they have done.
Families reunited after weeks of social distancing as some states begin a path out of lockdown. 30 million Americans out of work in just 6 weeks as global economies continue to slide. And scenes of better days ahead, how one country is winning the battle against COVID-19 without a lockdown.
This is SBS World News with Anton Enus.
Good evening. We have flattened the curve. That's the assessment tonight of Australia's Chief Medical Officer as cases of coronavirus continue to fall. The Prime Minister says that means Australians have earned an early mark from restrictions that have crippled the nation's economy but undoubtedly saved lives. In other developments, New South Wales and the Northern Territory began relaxing their restrictions today. The federal government announced a $205 million funding boost for the aged care sector. And overseas, more than 30 million Americans are now out of work as a result of the pandemic. At home, the number of new infections have plummeted since the peak over a month ago, with fewer than 20 new cases a day being recorded nationally. Scott Morrison says the key to winding back social distancing relies on millions more Australians downloading the government's coronavirus app.
A nation separated, together, accomplishing a united goal.
Pretty convincingly, we have flattened the curve.
Scott Morrison insisting that's not the only trend the nation needs to flatten.
We need to restart our economy. We need to restart our society. We can't keep Australia under the doona. We need to be able to move ahead.
Confirming National Cabinet will now fast-track its decision about whether to ease wide-scale social distancing restrictions from 4 weeks down to 3, when premiers and chief ministers sit down with the Prime Minister 1 week from today.
Australians have earned an early mark through the work that they have done.
Confirming 3.5 million Australians have downloaded the government's coronavirus tracing app.
We haven't put a target number. It just needs to be higher.
Prompting the same answer to questions about when we can get back to playing sport.
If you want to get out to play, download the app today.
And reopen our pubs and clubs.
Well, the first step to getting back to that is downloading COVID Safe. Now, if that isn't an incentive for Australians to download COVID Safe on a Friday, I don't know what is.
Insisting that decision remains voluntary, but
that is the ticket to opening up our economy and getting people back into jobs and getting businesses open again in a cautious way, in a careful way. It's not open slather.
Laughing off privacy concerns while using other personal data to show Australians have largely adhered to restrictions.
Google does track people. The COVID Safe app doesn't, but...
One restriction that won't be eased is the closure of Australia's borders, with net overseas migration now expected to fall by up to 85% next financial year.
And so that's a significant fall. And you'll be well aware from past budgets the importance of those numbers and how they contribute to overall gross domestic product.
As the Prime Minister calls on Australians to put the app in happy hour.
So it's over to you, Australia, as we go through this next 7 days. Thanks very much, everyone.
Brett Mason, SBS World News.
Restrictions in New South Wales were today eased for the first time as other states and territories prepared to do the same this weekend. The federal government also announced a funding injection to the aged care sector, as well as guidelines which could pave the way for relatives to visit family in nursing homes.
It's the day proud grandparents David Murrell and Penny Clements have been waiting for.
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, we've been trying to catch up through Zoom, but little Sydney's only 3 months old, and the last time we saw her was 5 weeks ago.
Visitation restrictions were eased today in New South Wales, allowing 2 adults to visit another household, to the delight of many around the state.
We're excited to share our beautiful daughter off to our family 2 at a time, and feel like we can get close again to our grandparent, it was my parents, her grandparents.
9 more cases were confirmed in New South Wales today. The virus outbreak at the Newmarch House aged care facility in Western Sydney is still the cause of serious concern for authorities. Another resident, a 74-year-old man, has died there, and new cases are still being discovered.
It's the question of whether it will be the staff that have infected the patients or whether there's something else that we're missing. These are always, it's always important to go into investigations with an open mind so you don't miss anything.
Another aged care facility, Hawthorne Grange in Melbourne's eastern suburbs, is also the subject of an investigation. 3 new cases were confirmed in Victoria, but while parts of the rest of the country are preparing to ease some restrictions, Premier Daniel Andrews is unmoved.
I'm also acutely aware that my responsibility is to not give back in a search to be popular for a few days all the hard-won gains that we have secured. This is fragile.
The federal government today announced a $205 million one-off payment to the aged care sector. Providers will receive $900 per occupied bed, while regional centres will be offered $1,350 per resident. The National Cabinet also today released the draft Visitor Access Code, which aims to ensure families and carers can visit residents in nursing homes, something which has so far mostly been restricted to end-of-life visits.
Those who have had a long history of visitation, working with their loved ones, going in for meals, helping the aged care facility to support their relatives. So those people who have a history are also contemplated as part of the codes.
Tasmania says it will ease restrictions in its northwest from Monday, while the Northern Territory today commenced its 3-stage roadmap to recovery. Queensland recorded a 5th consecutive day of no new cases as it prepares to ease restrictions from tomorrow. Matt Cannellan, SBS World News.
More than 30 million Americans have now applied for unemployment benefits since the coronavirus outbreak. That's about 1/6 of the US workforce. First quarter results from the Eurozone also paint a bleak picture for how economies are faring there.
3.8 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits in the past week, and that figure only takes into account applications that made it through a system struggling to cope.
It says the system has experienced an unexpected technical error. It happens every time. I get nowhere.
In the US, the unemployment rate is tipped to exceed 20% at its peak. Food banks are being pushed to the limit.
Usually by 8 o'clock in the morning, there's vehicles lined up a mile to a mile and a half long.
As government funding for food in some areas fails to keep up with rising grocery prices.
Hamburgers, $18.99, $31.99.
Prior to the crisis, about 11% of Americans suffered from food insecurity, and we have every reason to believe that those statistics are increasing dramatically in the current time period.
In a bid to ease the economic pain, at least 32 US states will ease some restrictions by the end of next week. That's despite diagnosed cases of the virus increasing in at least 18 states. The virus has now killed more than 61,000 Americans.
If we start to see a regression, if people are not respecting the rules, then obviously we will not hesitate to start re-restricting.
Across the Atlantic, the Eurozone experienced a record decline in GDP in its first quarter, down 3.8%. And that doesn't take the month of April into account, a month spent in lockdown.
Growth scenarios produced by ECB staff suggest that euro area GDP could fall by between 5% and 12% this year.
But compared to the US, the rise in unemployment was modest. Even still, 300,000 Germans lost work last month.
Die gesamte Weltwirtschaft und auch unsere Volkswirtschaft in Deutschland ist konfrontiert mit dem größten wirtschaftlichen Einschnitt in unserer Geschichte. Wir rechnen mit der schwersten Rezession der Nachkriegsgeschichte.
A grim prediction that doesn't shock anyone anymore. Rachel Carey, SBS World News.
SBS Finance Editor Ricardo Gonçalves joins us now with more. Ricardo, how have global markets reacted?
Anton, shares in the US only fell around 1% overnight, wrapping up the best month since 2002. But in after-hours trading, investors started mulling the reports of two of the country's biggest companies. Apple recorded slowing revenue growth, saying it couldn't provide an earnings outlook, while Amazon said the $6 billion it expects to make over the coming months will be entirely spent on COVID-19 related expenses. Now, a hit to company profits isn't good news for economic growth nor investor confidence, and here, that's what the market was focusing on. Despite April's record 9% rise, the Australian share market started the new month 5% weaker. $84 billion wiped from the boards of our top 200 listed companies. But there may also be an old adage at play: sell in May and stay away. I asked CMC's Michael McCarthy if that was the case.
Well, funnily enough, there is, Ricardo. In fact, we do know that over the last 55 years, statistically, the period from May until October is one of the worst performing parts of the year. Now, that doesn't mean that it will happen in every year, but the turnaround we've seen this week from optimism to pessimism suggests that it might well work in 2020.
We'll have more on the markets later in On the Money, plus a warning from the ATO about the early release of superannuation, Anton.
Thanks, Ricardo. US President Donald Trump has suggested he's seen evidence the coronavirus originated in a Chinese laboratory. That appears to undercut his own intelligence community assessment. Just hours earlier, US intelligence determined it was not man-made or genetically modified.
Leaving New York Harbour, US Navy ship Comfort. Its mission to treat COVID-19 patients over. Far from over, the examination in Washington over exactly where the virus came from. The acting director of national intelligence, Richard Grenell, issuing a highly unusual public statement that US intelligence concurs with the wide scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified. If the outbreak was the result of an accident at a laboratory in Wuhan is still being considered. At the White House, President Trump going much further.
Have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
He would not reveal what that information is.
I'm not allowed to tell you that.
What the administration would like to talk about, plans to accelerate the development of a vaccine.
We want to go quickly, but we want to make sure it's safe and it's effective.
Dubbed Operation Warp Speed, the aim is to deliver a breakthrough by year's end.
You know who's in charge of it? Honestly, I am.
Across America, signs of irritation with those in charge. In Michigan, days of protest at stay-at-home orders. Today, demonstrators bearing guns, making their way into the legislature. Defiance too in Orange County, California.
I'm going to come here anyway. What are they going to do? They're going to try and arrest me?
Beaches to be shut on Saturday after huge crowds last weekend. On the East Coast, a different order of inconvenience. The New York subway to be shut each night so it can be disinfected. The state still reeling on a daily basis.
Number of lives lost, still terrible. 306.
And in Brooklyn, indignity heaped upon the deceased. Police finding around 50 bodies stored on ice in rented trucks outside a funeral home. Neighbours complained to authorities of a smell.
I have no idea in the world how any funeral home could let this happen. It's unconscionable to me.
The owner of the business said he'd been overwhelmed by the number of corpses. Through the One SBS World News.
And Prime Minister Scott Morrison has responded to President Trump's claims the virus started in a lab, saying it's unlikely but should be part of a global investigation.
The most likely scenario that has been canvassed relates to wildlife wet markets, but that's a matter that would have to be thoroughly assessed. This is one of the reasons why it is important that we just have an objective, independent assessment of how this originated and learn the lessons from how that occurred.
China continues to fiercely defend its handling of the outbreak. Coming up next, Boris Johnson says the UK is past its coronavirus peak, but why won't he reveal the path to easing restrictions? The road to success. What lessons can be learned from how South Korea approached the outbreak? British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has declared the UK has passed its coronavirus peak and is on the downward slope. While much of Europe has begun to loosen lockdowns, Mr Johnson says he won't set out his roadmap to easing restrictions until next week. The UK has over 172,000 cases of the virus, the death toll approaching 27,000. SBS Europe correspondent Ben Lewis joins us now live from London. Ben, good evening. Is this genuinely good news or just the Prime Minister putting a positive spin on things?
Well, Anton, good evening. It is really a little bit of both. It's important to remember that the UK has the second highest death toll in Europe and the third highest globally. But Boris Johnson insists that the UK's handling of coronavirus has been a success. He says his government has made the right decisions at the right time, and he is correct when he says that the curve has been flattened. The Prime Minister clapped for carers outside number 10 Downing Street, looking considerably healthier than the last time he took part in the weekly event. At his first press conference since recovering from COVID-19, he said there is, at long last, reason for optimism.
We've come through the peak, or rather, we've come under what could have been a vast peak, as though we've been going through some huge alpine tunnel. And we can now see the sunlight and the pasture ahead of us.
Mr Johnson is promising to set out a plan on how to restart the economy and get children back to school next week. He also signalled a change in advice when it comes to face masks.
I do think that face coverings will be useful, both for epidemiological reasons, but also for giving people confidence that they can go back to work.
Decisions on easing the lockdown will depend on the reproduction number, or R value. That's the number of people one infected person will pass the virus on to on average. The ideal figure is less than 1, and the lower the better. The UK's experts believe R is somewhere between 0.6 and 0.9. In Germany, R rose to 0.96 after the loosening of lockdown laws, before dropping back to 0.76. Angela Merkel has announced a further gentle easing of restrictions. Playgrounds, places of worship and museums can now reopen.
Wir haben es ja bis jetzt geschafft, die Dynamik der Ausbreitung des Virus zu bremsen. Und das muss auch wieder weiter unser Leitgedanke sein, zumal uns die Wissenschaftler der führenden Wissenschaftsorganisationen hier ja auch immer wieder sagen, dass wir daran arbeiten sollen und müssen, die Zahl der Infizierten, auch wenn sie heute schon viel geringer ist, noch weiter nach unten zu bringen.
Spaniards will soon be able to go for a walk and meet relatives from a distance for the first time since mid-March. But authorities are warning that unnecessary risks should be avoided. That includes hugs.
Decir que psicológicamente es magnífico dar abrazos a todo el mundo que se pueda, pero tenemos que entender que estamos en una situación de riesgo. Es una situación de riesgo que no va a durar siempre.
In Moscow, the streets are still relatively busy despite a strict lockdown, as the country's Prime Minister made a personal announcement.
Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, только что стало известно, что тесты, которые я сдал на коронавирус, дали положительный результат.
President Vladimir Putin told the PM what's happening to him can happen to anyone. Here in Britain, the government was heavily criticised for not doing more testing for coronavirus early on in this pandemic, and so the Health Secretary set an ambitious target of 100,000 tests a day by the end of April. The final numbers won't be in for a few hours yet, but on Wednesday, 81,000 tests were conducted. The government confident it will hit the target. But Anton, medical experts tell us that the real challenge will be keeping those numbers up in the weeks to come.
That is Ben Lewis with the latest out of the UK. Well, one country that seems to have got its testing strategy right is South Korea. Back in January and February, it had one of the world's largest outbreaks of the virus. It then carried out widespread testing and contact tracing. but avoided imposing a national lockdown.
These are the better days many people across the world are being promised. It's possible here because South Korea was prepared for a pandemic. And now they haven't just flattened the curve, they've crushed it. The situation looked critical in February. Medics were battling one of the worst outbreaks in the world. Cases spiralled in the city of Daegu. But they got infection rates under control. Fewer than 250 people have died. Staff even have time to give us a smile. So how was it done?
Given the highly contagious nature of this virus, we knew from the very early on that testing and tracking was critical.
They ramped up testing within days of the first case. Anyone who thought they had the virus was swabbed. They also got a bit creative and made it even safer for staff. Next, they tracked the spread of the infection. CCTV, phone and bank records pieced together the movements of COVID-19 carriers to find others who could have been infected.
So if someone in this cafe was confirmed with coronavirus, everyone in the area would be sent a text message telling them that they were at risk and that they needed to isolate themselves and get a test.
Public health was valued over privacy.
I think it is necessary to provide this information. I myself check in the website to find out about new cases and where they are.
Yes, it is a violation against privacy, but it is necessary. This is a global fight. We are all in this together.
Schools are still closed, but some company entrance exams went ahead. Temperature checks are now part of daily life. And social distancing is still taken seriously. And in the search for safe spaces, young lovers rediscovered the romance of the drive-through in this movie-mad nation. Of course, there is the fear that COVID-19 will return. For now, South Korea offers a lesson and some hope, not just on how to handle the virus, but they've shown what is possible during this pandemic.
House prices have risen across the country, but does that show the full picture? We look at how the pandemic is changing activity throughout Australia and what it means for the property market. That story shortly. With universities and tertiary institutions shut during the pandemic, many international students face serious hardship. They are not eligible for job seeker or job keeper payments, but some states and territories are providing financial help. Now pressure is building on New South Wales to do the same.
Nisha Parekh and her husband arrived in Australia 1 week before lockdown.
We are just settled here and after that we can't find any job.
At the time of coming we are very excited about Sydney because there's a new place for both of us.
They're among 400 international students in Sydney who have registered for free food hampers from Sikh volunteers.
This is our Indian grocery hamper that is being specially designed for the international students and other immigrants who are recent arrivals. This has all the Indian grocery items that people need.
International students inject about $32 billion into Australia's economy. But in New South Wales, many say they've been neglected during the pandemic.
Ministers say that they can't provide a help. You can go home. How can we go home?
Miss Henda was laid off at a Sydney hotel. Her family in India was supporting her until their income was hit by the national lockdown. New South Wales has yet to provide financial support to international students. The Northern Territory is diverting part of a fund to help keep international students in work. Queensland's supporting students with online counselling, care packs and meals. There are emergency one-off payments available in Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. The ACT has a direct employment fund. And in WA, a crisis relief program has been launched. The Labor Party says New South Wales is the only state in the country without dedicated support for international students.
Right now, the world is watching how New South Wales, how Sydney treats international students.
Premier Gladys Berejiklian says support is still being considered.
There are discussions which are happening
at a national level. The New South Wales government hasn't made any decision in that regard at this stage, but you'd have to assume that would be a decision or an indication from a National Cabinet perspective.
Volunteers for Turbans for Australia have been so busy they've opened another location.
This would be the biggest event for us in the 5 years we've been going, and it's a stressful situation for all, but also financially it's crippling.
Inside the hall, they pack and hand out hampers, lend a listening ear 7 days a week. Charlotte Lamb, SBS World News.
5 members of the Australian Defence Force personnel have tested positive to COVID-19. 4 returned home from the Middle East on a routine flight and were tested in a Darwin hospital. Another soldier had returned to Brisbane after a recent deployment and is now in quarantine. None of the 5 displayed any symptoms. Cargo ships, tugboats and cruise ships have sounded their horns in recognition of an estimated 150,000 seafarers stranded at sea because of the pandemic. Strict border measures are preventing foreign nationals from entering many countries, so crew changes are not happening.
A deafening choir as ships around the country and around the world sound their horn in solidarity. Today is May the 1st, internationally recognised as Labour Day. And this year, seafarers are in the spotlight as they've been working to maintain the global supply chain, even if it means they can't get home to see their families.
The issue with coronavirus is that so many countries have closed their borders, and so what that means for a global workforce is once they're at work, getting home is really problematic.
In Australia, it's the state and territory border requirements that are causing havoc. The maritime industry estimates there are more than 2,000 Australian seafarers currently in hotel isolation following domestic travel. One of them is Captain Ben Phillips, who supplies oil rigs of Western Australia's north coast. Normally, he spends 5 weeks at sea and 5 weeks at home in country New South Wales with his wife and 3 children. But he's had to fly to WA early to quarantine before he starts his shift, meaning he'll spend almost 2 months away from home.
You know, with the new roster where I'm essentially away twice as much as I normally would be, I'm home half the time. Yeah, very difficult to tell the family and, difficult to absorb.
For international seafarers, the shifts are much longer. In some cases, workers spend 8 to 10 months at sea, a long time made longer without the respite of shore leave at a foreign port. There are 8 ships here in Port Botany, and it's home to the sounding of the horns gives crews hope and the feeling they're not alone. The plight of those stuck at sea has driven Sister Mary Leahy, the chaplain at Port Botany in Sydney South, to put together more than 1,000 care baskets to boost spirits.
Like in a recent study from Yale University, it indicated that 20% of seafarers contemplate self-harm. So it is very alarming, and isolation can feed into that and all the other things, and now this.
The packages are filled with reading material, personal care items and chocolates. Small pleasures to make seafarers' time aboard a little more comfortable. Lucy Murray, SBS World News.
A man has been shot and killed by police after he allegedly went on a stabbing rampage near a shopping centre in Western Australia. Port Hedland police were called to a shopping centre in the Pilbara region around 10 a.m. following reports that a man armed with a knife was attacking members of the public at random. 5 people were taken to hospital following the incident, with 2 in a serious but stable condition.
This is also not believed to be a politically or ideologically motivated terrorist attack. There is no question in my mind that this is not a terrorist-related matter.
The funerals for 2 of the 4 police officers killed on Melbourne's Eastern Freeway last week were held today at the Victorian Police Academy. Constable Glenn Humphries was farewelled this morning by his family and partner Todd Robinson. He saluted Constable Humphries as he was driven to his final resting place. Senior Constable Kevin King's funeral service was held this afternoon and attended by his partner and 3 sons. Police officers statewide observed a minute's silence on radio orders from the Chief Commissioner. Just one day after the resignation of federal MP Mike Kelly, the race is on for his seat of Eden Monaro. Today, opposition leader Anthony Albanese unveiled his preferred Labor candidate, Bega Mayor Christy McBain, as speculation continues about the future of New South Wales Deputy Premier John Barilaro.
I did not set out seeking this position, but I want to take it on. And I want to take it on for a couple of reasons. I'm local, I'm from the community, and I've worked for the community for a number of years now.
The contest will be the first by-election of this parliamentary term and is being touted as a test of the Prime Minister and Mr Albanese. The Northern Territory is on track to become the first state or territory to resume normal life during the pandemic. In a move seen as a test case for Australia, some outdoor activities are now permitted. Restaurants, bars, cafes and gyms are likely to open in 2 weeks. But for some business owners, the economic impact of the coronavirus is irreversible.
Belinda Nolan is a Darwin wedding planner, organising ceremonies involving up to 300 guests. Until today, her biggest wedding party was limited to 5.
A lot of our clients have already made the decision to reschedule or postpone till next year.
Today, that changed as the Territory government rolled out stage 1 of eased restrictions. Children can return to playgrounds. Fishing and camping is permitted. Any outdoor activity where people can maintain social distancing is also allowed. The rules limiting the number of wedding guests and mourners at funerals has also been lifted. Ms Nolan says the measures are yet to make a difference to her business.
For us, for our couples, I haven't had any calls or emails today asking, can we go ahead with our wedding?
But it is the first step in the resumption of normal activities.
It'll just start the journey forward to normalising funerals how people expect them to be and want them to be.
For 6 weeks, lockdown restrictions saw much of the Territory shut down. There have been no deaths nor community transfer. Territorians saying it's been worth it.
We're feeling pretty safe in the sense of getting around and seeing everyone behaving themselves.
It's a little bit exciting. Hopefully we all do the right thing and socially distance properly and we can fully open up.
With that in mind, health experts have urged people not to become complacent.
Don't do a Bondi. That's important. We still have, indeed, an emergency situation here.
Police will also be out in force this long weekend.
We don't want to move into sanctions straight away. It's the last thing we want to do, but we do want compliance.
To keep Territorians safe. Anita Boley, SBS World News.
House prices continue to rise in April, but there are signs the market is running out of steam. SBS Finance Editor Ricardo Gonçalves joins us now with more. Ricardo, growth appears to be slowing.
Anton, it may be harder to view a home with restrictions on property inspections, but that didn't stop house prices from rising 0.3% last month on average across the country, according to CoreLogic. So, is there a coronavirus-induced decline to come?
The number of house and unit sales settled around the country plunged by around 40% in April, but it hasn't translated into a fall in house prices yet. Part of the reason is that listings have also dried up in the climate of uncertainty, while offers of assistance from banks have also helped.
I think what has been most important is probably the reprieve that's being offered on mortgage repayments by the banks. This has probably stopped a lot of people being in a more distressed financial situation.
Darwin posted a house price gain of 1.7% for April, while Sydney and Adelaide saw a more modest 0.4% increase. Canberra remained flat, while Hobart and Melbourne both had small falls. There are concerns the building industry is facing widespread job losses, with new modelling predicting a 27% slump in new home construction this year. That prompted the Master Builders Association and the CFMEU to call for a $10 billion government bailout to build social housing and help protect jobs.
This is unprecedented. And it is the speed of that drop that is particularly concerning, where people had a significant amount of work on their books, all of a sudden that has evaporated.
Associated industries will also feel the effects of a dramatic slowdown.
We are at the moment running scenarios looking at how we should manage and think about a business that might be somewhere between 25 to 50% smaller for the coming 6 months.
The downturn isn't just threatening the 1.2 million people directly employed in the construction industry.
If this industry goes under, then likewise hundreds of thousands of other jobs will be in jeopardy as well.
John Baldock, SBS World News.
The ATO has warned penalties may be applied to individuals who make an early withdrawal of their superannuation to assist with the financial impact of COVID-19 if they aren't genuinely eligible. It comes as the Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia estimates 855,000 individual payments have been made by local super funds totalling $7.1 billion. Now, the average withdrawal is $8,200.
Taking money out of your superannuation should be a last resort. It's reducing your retirement income in the future. It's a loan that you're borrowing from your future self, and you should make every endeavour not to do that. And if you do take out money, try and not take out more than you actually need.
In a statement to SBS, an ATO spokesperson said whilst individuals will not need to provide evidence to support their applications, they should retain their documentation should they be asked to provide it at a later stage. Eligibility include those who are unemployed, made redundant or have had working hours reduced by 20% or more, or are receiving benefits like Job Seeker, for example. A full list can be found on the ATO website. Interstate trips could still be months away, according to one of Australia's largest listed travel companies. Hello World says it expects to see the reopening of the domestic travel market by September this year. Trans-Tasman trips by October, November. But mid to long-haul international leisure or corporate travel won't resume with any substantial volume until 2021, and it'll take a vaccine or cure for COVID-19 to see a full return to past levels. The company is forecasting cash losses of as much as $2 million per month for the next 6 months. Plane maker Boeing will axe around 230 jobs at its Melbourne manufacturing plant following a collapse in orders. It's part of a global cost-cutting measure that will see around 10% of Boeing's workforce laid off. The Port Melbourne facility employs around 1,100 people making aircraft components. The company says it's raised nearly $40 billion in new debt to help it through the downturn. The financial toll of COVID-19 is being felt across Australian households. The Bureau of Statistics says 1 in 3 say their finances had worsened due to the virus in the mid-March to mid-April reporting period. 55% saw no change, but 14% an improvement. 1 in 4 respondents have received the government's first round stimulus payment of $750, and more than half put that money into savings. The ABS says that more Australians are becoming mentally stressed as well.
We found that compared to what we normally find in our National Health Survey, that nearly twice as many Australians were experiencing nervousness and restlessness, which is associated with anxiety, compared to what we normally see.
The ABS says younger people are twice as likely than older people to be experiencing those feelings. And after what had been a solid week for the Australian share market, concerns for the global economy has almost completely wiped out the previous 4 days of gains, the 200 posting its worst session in 5 weeks. All sectors ended lower. Materials, the biggest drag. NAB went ex-dividend today. CSL fell 3.5%, but ResMed was one of just 9 stocks to end the day higher after it posted a strong quarterly update as it ramps up production of ventilators. The Australian dollar has fallen back below 65 US cents ahead of the Reserve Bank board meeting on Tuesday. And on Monday, Anton, Westpac will be the last of the big 4 banks to report.
Thanks, Ricardo. The coronavirus pandemic has changed the way Muslims around the world are observing Ramadan. In Iran, the food service industry has been hit hard. Before the pandemic, restaurants were already struggling. Now, many small businesses have closed their doors.
For many Iranians, there is no better way to break their fast than with one of the country's most traditional meals. Ash and Halim, slow-cooked stews of meat, lentils, and vegetables. They're high in protein, packed with flavor, and affordable. But this year, sales are down because of COVID-19.
There were usually more customers in Ramadan and more profit. The coronavirus has had a big impact. We were closed for 2 months but reopened recently. With health protocols, people are still afraid. We are waiting to see how it will go, but there are less customers.
Restaurants are closed most of the day in keeping with Islamic tradition. Business hours in other sectors also reduced. Ramadan can be a time of lost income for food service workers and day laborers. So traders sell homemade food on the streets to supplement their income. Before the coronavirus outbreak, restaurants were already struggling. Months of political and economic unrest meant fewer customers. Many small businesses have gone under. Many more are on the verge of doing so.
Because of the coronavirus, I can't say exactly, but we've lost about 50% of our income. We've been facing problems for months.
This husband and wife operation had to fire their employees to stay afloat. Now they cook the food, operate the till, and deliver the few orders they get all by themselves. Some days they only get 2 orders, making just $5. They say reduced Ramadan hours only make things worse. The government has ordered mosques, shrines, and places of mass worship to remain closed. Religious rituals in the time of coronavirus promise to be a more solitary affair.
But Ramadan is also a time to be with friends and family, breaking the fast at the end of the day with loved ones around a table of food, helping those that are less fortunate. These traditions are as much a part of the Islamic month of fasting as anything else.
Iranians we met said gatherings at dinner tables are likely to be smaller this year.
We haven't been inviting guests over since the outbreak of the virus. We haven't gone anywhere either, and no iftar parties at all.
And this year Iranians say they'll be praying especially for one thing: an end to the coronavirus pandemic.
Coming up next, struggling to get the message. The rural farmers given a lifeline, but why they've been unable to receive the help. Also getting closer, which state government has given approval for the NRL to return? The French government is encouraging people to ride bikes after the coronavirus lockdowns are eased. They're offering citizens €50 each towards bike repairs. It's designed to maintain social distancing and reduce overcrowding on public transport. The nationwide lockdown in India is hurting its crucial farming sector, which employs more than half of the country's workforce. A lack of workers and the breakdown in supply chains have left many farmers struggling to sell winter crops.
A hive of activity during a nationwide lockdown, farmers bring their wheat to a government procurement centre in the state of Uttar Pradesh. It's a small victory for Brajesh Sharma, who struggled to harvest his crop this season without the help of seasonal workers. The father of 3 says his family helped him cut the crop and register to sell it to the government.
Everyone faced a lot of problems with registration. Everything is shut. So how and where are we supposed to do it? We had no idea. The children have some education, so they were able to do it on their mobile phones.
The government is sending electronic coupons to farmers with a date and time to bring their produce to the centres. But in rural areas, many don't have smartphones and internet connections to receive them.
India's lockdown couldn't have come at a worse time for farmers. They're at their busiest between April and June, when winter crops like wheat are harvested and the fields are prepared for summer crops to be sown.
Without the technology needed to register his crop or public transport to take it to a government centre or private market, Bhupender Bhatti is worried about how he and his family will survive.
We can't sow the next crop as we need money from this harvest to buy seeds and fertilizers.
Many farmers have seen their fruit and vegetables go to waste. Despite farming being exempt from the lockdown, the restrictions on people's movement and transport has led to supply chains breaking down. India has large reserves of grains, but economists say extra stocks of rice and wheat aren't enough.
It's also about pulses and fruits and vegetables, and Indian diets are already very poor. The malnutrition rates are very high. So we need to ensure that variety of food reaches people's plates. So both from a point of view of food security as well as keeping the economy going, it's very important that we support agriculture and don't let it collapse completely.
The government says agriculture is functioning smoothly and there are no shortages of food, but many reject that. And with more than half of India's workforce employed in agriculture, experts say it must do more to help farmers and secure the harvest for the next season.
Australian researchers have identified the platypus as the next likely victim of climate change. A new study is now underway to track their movements as rescued platypuses return to the wild. Scientists and conservationists have released 3, which have been taken to Taronga Zoo to ensure their survival in the New South Wales drought. 3 more will be released in coming weeks. The NRL has received a boost in its plan to return later this month after the Queensland government granted approval for sides to train and travel interstate. The governing body is now just waiting for Australia's Border Force Commissioner to approve the New Zealand Warriors travel exemption. That will allow players to return to training next week. Australian Rugby League Commission Chairman Peter V'landers has warned that any further breaches of social distancing rules by players will likely see the competition shut down.
Look, the Premier was very direct. It's up to the players. If there's a slip-by by the players and they do the wrong thing, that puts the whole rugby league season in doubt. So I'm putting all my faith and trust in the players, and I know that they'll deliver.
Players will return to their clubs on Monday for an education day on the code's biosecurity measures. Coming up, the weather and Britain's most generous centenarian and the gift that brought him to tears. The Bureau of Meteorology has issued a severe weather warning tomorrow for damaging winds in the Illawarra, Snowy Mountains and ACT, and flood warnings for parts of Victoria's Gippsland region. A cold front is forecast to extend until Monday. The system has toppled records along the eastern seaboard, blanketing Mount Hotham and surrounding alpine areas in snow. Melbourne has experienced its coldest ever start to May. Let's go to the forecast now. That cold front is moving a thick cloud band with embedded thunderstorms into the Tasman Sea. Speckled cloud can be seen in the very cold air mass in the wake of that system, pushing out to the Southern Ocean and across South Australia and through Victoria and New South Wales. In the major centres, a shower or 2 in Adelaide, Melbourne and Canberra, sunny in Brisbane and Perth, showers and windy in Hobart and windy and clear in Sydney. Looking further afield now, partly cloudy in Auckland, a few showers in Wellington, showers also in Samoa, partly cloudy in Noumea. In Southeast Asia, partly cloudy in Bangkok, thunder in Kuala Lumpur, showers in Phnom Penh, rain in Honiara. Further north, fine in Beijing, partly cloudy in Hong Kong, clouds also in Seoul, sunshine in Tokyo. Heading west, fine in Baghdad, thunder in Delhi, rain in Islamabad, thunder in Tehran. On to Europe now, partly cloudy in Madrid, cloudy in Paris, overcast in London, rain for Rome. In Africa, rain in Addis Ababa, partly cloudy in Johannesburg, thunder in Lagos and a few showers for Nairobi. In South America, sunny in Buenos Aires, a few showers in La Paz, drizzle for Panama City and partly cloudy in Santiago. And for North America, sunny in New York, partly cloudy in Washington, D.C., fog for Los Angeles, partly cloudy in Vancouver and a few showers for Havana. British veteran Thomas Moore has celebrated his centenary in extraordinary style after raising $55 million for the National Health Service. The 100-year-old later had his rank upgraded from captain to honorary colonel. An honour, he said, was the icing on the cake of a day that had included greetings from the Queen and the Prime Minister. Spending the day at home, he was honoured by friends old and new.
Captain Tom, that is exactly what you are. A point of light in all our lives.
I'm delighted that the effort that we set off for such a small sum has turned into this enormous sum of money.
The Colonel's campaign has inspired millions of pounds in donations and 120,000 people have sent him birthday cards. Whether it's a bump or lump or bad cough, cancer specialists are urging Australians to keep up their normal health routines and get things checked out. Health professionals are reporting a drop in visits to GPs and specialists, but say people must keep their health in check now to avoid bigger problems later.
5 years ago, Lillian Lee put off seeing a doctor about her bad cough. When she finally made the time, the diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer was a shock.
No family history, no other risk factors that could have answered that question of why.
Ms Lee is still going through treatment to keep her cancer stable and says while COVID-19 is an extra hurdle, it's not an excuse to put off normal checks.
Don't be nervous. Trust your doctor. Trust that the system is there to look after you and go and check.
Sentiments echoed by cancer specialists nationwide, concerned by the drop in attendance to GPs and screening programs.
We really don't want cancers to be missed now that then become evident in 6, 9 or 12 months' time.
Cancer Australia launching a guide for health professionals to identify lung cancer quickly amid the pandemic.
So we just want people to remember that a cough or a chest infection is not always due to COVID-19.
Doctors have also reported current cancer patients delaying treatment because of the virus, which could lead to more deadly cancers later.
There's a concern that we are not seeing as many patients as before, and quite rightly some of them may be safely delayed, and that could be a clinical decision by the clinicians sometimes, but we don't want the patients to make that decision on their own.
A recent UK study predicted 18,000 more cancer-related deaths after the pandemic because of suspended or deferred treatment. One of its authors says while Australia is in a better position than Britain, we'll still see some effects.
I would predict that we're going to see the same pattern worldwide. It may vary in its nuance or in its range.
That's why doctors want to reassure the public telehealth is an option and attending a hospital or clinic is safe. Advocates say this information is particularly important to our multicultural communities.
If you do have cancer and you're wanting to weigh up that issue of what's the risk if I do go in and get treatment and how can I make that decision for myself, it is really difficult to access that information.
For Ms Lee, the message is simple.
The earlier you're diagnosed, the better chance you have in terms of survival, in terms of quality of life, and it's so important.
Amelia Dunn, SBS World News.
Good advice. And that is the world of this Friday. If you missed some of tonight's bulletin, you can catch up on the SBS World News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on our app. We'll have our next bulletin for you at 10:20 with Catalina Flores. Good night.